Hello, my fellow mods, and welcome to The Perspecta. I'm your host, John O'Neill, and in association with DC Hillier and MCM Daily, DC, Greg, and I just sat around the fire with some ice cream and heard many stories of the life and work of Adrian Pearsall as told by his son, Jim. Jim recounted opening a restaurant adorned by his father's furniture, told us about the formative years of Adrian's furniture career, covered his life and design philosophies, and we talked a bit about authentication and licensing. Welcome to this familial conversation with Jim Pearsall.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you today?
Doing very well. Cool background. I love it.
Look at the grasshopper lounge chair behind you.
You got it. It's better there than if I just show you my family room. The family room is, I've been living alone for the last 4 days. My wife just arrived and it's a mess.
I know how that stag weekend goes sometimes. But Jim, thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Are you out in New Hope now? Is that where you're living?
We live in New Hope. We moved here 20 years ago. We when we first got married, moved to Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, right on.
For no particular reason. Actually, I had a restaurant.
The weather's nice.
I had a restaurant in Pennsylvania, kind of on Harvey's Lake, which is a summertime resort area.
Sure.
I didn't realize that no one would come there during the winter. So after
that seasonality can be
three
tough.
seasons there, and my wife, who actually I hired as my first waitress,
oh wow,
kind of had lived all over the United States. Her father got transferred a lot, and the last place she ended up was in Wilkes-Barre. And when I asked her to marry me, she said, "I will marry you, but I will not live in Wilkes-Barre." So we just kind of put our finger on a map.
Yeah.
Went to Fort Lauderdale and opened a restaurant there.
Wow.
And it was actually very successful until Fort Lauderdale at that time only had one skyscraper. It's called the Landmark Bank Building. That was in 1976 or something like that.
Cool.
And so at that time it was great. You know, we had we were the only restaurant in downtown Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, wow.
And, but the property was owned by a church, and we were renting what used to be one of their church schools.
Sure.
And they wanted it back. And at that point, Fort Lauderdale was undergoing a lot of building.
Yeah. A lot of change.
And I went to my father and I said, I need a loan because I needed to go and rent another space someplace and build a restaurant. And he said, "How much do you need?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I need about $1 million." And he said, "I think you need to find another job."
Yeah, restaurants are not easy in terms of startup capital. I mean, there's so much, especially if you're getting a space, right, that you really have to build into. Right. And sort of transform the kitchen. There's always going to be something, even if you buy it pre-made. It sounds like your first restaurant in Harvey's Lake, that was like a bit of a ski area or ski lodge that you were able to.
Yeah, it's not exactly.
I mean,
it's not like northeastern Pennsylvania where we have big mountains or everything like Elk Mountain or something like that. But someone as dumb as I was thought they could build a little ski resort at the top of a hill in Harvey's Lake, and
so cool.
They put in a tow rope and maybe got a small membership there. But after 2 or 3 seasons, I think it failed. But I was one of those kids that never did well in school. And I was my freshman year of high school, I was asked to leave with 5 Fs. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart or anything. I just thought there was something better out there. And I asked my parents if they would please send me away to a boarding school. And they
New
said,
experience.
"Oh, you don't want to go to boarding school." And I said, "No, I really do. I just want out of Wilkes-Barre. I want out of everyone that I'd gone to nursery school, I was still going to school with. You know, it's
right.
like one big family that I wasn't enjoying so much." And
My town was pretty small too. I know that feeling. It gets a little clicky.
It did. And I found a great school called the Darrow School, which was a Shaker community. Shakers are a very industrious population. Unfortunately, they didn't believe in propagation, so it didn't last too long, about 70 or 80 years.
That will happen,
But they were also artists.
And sticklers for quality too, right? And their builds and stuff.
Really, really good stuff. And there were about 38 kids in my class, and a total of about 120 in the whole school.
Wow.
And really blossomed there. I loved doing it. Everything from, castrating sheep to making maple syrup, and just different people that I wasn't accustomed to.
Yeah.
And
was that specifically for culinary, or was
it was just
all sorts of exposure?
A school for boys that didn't know where they were going, really. And so I fell in love with the Shaker architecture, and it was probably the first time I could ever communicate with my father about what he did, because up to that point I really wasn't involved in what he did. I know he made a lot of money selling furniture or making furniture. He was never home. But now I could actually say, I made a chair, Dad. I know what it's all about, or what I thought I knew it was all about. And he really appreciated that. And he actually appreciated the style once I introduced him to it, the utility of it and everything. So that was sort of like my first love with furniture. Then when all my teachers at that school found out that my father made furniture, I started selling furniture to all my teachers.
Right. And, that's amazing.
So that's how I got my first introduction to sales. But when I was at school, I came from a family that loved to cook. I mean, my dad cooked he cooked the Sunday dinner.
Oh, wow.
My mother was not a particularly good cook, so it was somewhat of a bit of a necessity for me for breakfast every morning. But my roommate and I decided, we could make some extra money for the ski slopes on weekends if we just could maybe cater some faculty parties or whatever.
Get a few people in here.
And it became almost a weekend event for us. One faculty member or another would say, "Hey, Jim, we're having some company over for dinner. Would you cook dinner for us?" And after doing that 8 or 9, 10 times, we just said, "Hey, maybe we could run a restaurant this summer." Why not, right?
Well, if the space is open, right, and I'm sure your father helped with some decor or some
he absolutely
that kind
did.
of stuff.
In every venture that I did, he would come up with ideas, and then that gave me an opportunity to actually work side by side with him. I never knew what I was doing. I almost took my finger off a couple times,
Kitchen's a dangerous place.
And my dad was one of those people that he didn't say, "This is what we're going to make." He said, "Let's try this." And it was, it would drive you nuts, because we take it apart 3 times, 4 times and rebuild it and rebuild it. And, he was instrumental in furnishing this little ski lodge that we had.
Cool.
And so I had a good friend that I grew up with. I had my roommate from school, and Dad had found this abandoned ski lodge not too far from where we had a summer house. And I put a menu together and hired my sister as a waitress. My brother was the maitre d'. He was 13. And
so
we were open
family affair. That's beautiful.
6 days a week with a limited menu of 3 entrees, 3 soups, 3 appetizers, 1 salad, 3 desserts. And I think our price fix was $9.99.
Wow.
Fortunately, we had some really great customers, and one of them actually wrote to Craig Claiborne, who was the food editor of the New York Times, and said, "You wouldn't believe what these young teenagers are doing. You've got to come and see this." She wrote that letter at the end of our first season, and he didn't get to come, but he said, "If they open it again, let me know and I'll be there."
Sure.
And a year later, he came out, and I didn't even know who Craig Claiborne was. But he came out and did a story on us, which was almost a full page in the New York Times in his food section.
It's incredible.
So that's how I got my start in the restaurant business.
Yeah.
But also gave me a chance to, blend in with my dad and what he was doing. And my father was one of those people, Jim, if you do anything, try to work for yourself. He said, you can work for other people, but you'll never make as much money as if you didn't do it yourself.
Just less mouths to feed, right? In the
Right,
chain.
right.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
I don't know that he was particularly, wanted me to be in the restaurant business or anything, but that's what I knew how to do. And I knew how to do it fairly well.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. And that's so cool to be able to come together. I mean, it sounds like between, some of the shaker influence as well as how you've described, working with your dad to get things right. He really seemed to bring that commitment to quality and sort of, just the right sort of solution for that problem. Is that similar to
a lot, and they were entertained a lot, in his business. Sure. So he had
probably
been
had
to
some experience there
all the
too.
finest restaurants, and he knew what good service was. And my mom, particularly, how to set a table, or and just everything that made their dining experiences special. They wanted to see me do and share that with me, and I was happy to do that. And, that's where it all started.
And I feel like too, we've brought up this concept a couple of times of a bit of like a polymath, right? And it's somebody who kind of brings the same philosophies to a number of different fields and might excel at them. It sounds like your dad may have, certainly fallen into that category between furniture and, it sounds like sailing and restoration. Did he bring an overall design philosophy like to those things and sort of a commitment to that quality?
Dad, I'm definitely, his son, because he was not a good student either. And and his father was a one-room school headmaster in
smaller clique.
in Trumansburg, New York. And it was kind of embarrassing for his father because Dad would half the time never show up to school.
Wait, and he was his teacher? Oh,
yeah.
Man, that's tough.
But he eventually, I can't remember where he initially went to school. I think Oklahoma State, but then he decided to join the Navy. And after the Navy, the war was ending. He got out of the Navy and he got the GI Bill to go to school, and he was accepted to University Illinois School of Architecture.
Oh wow!
Who knew, that he had an aptitude for that or anything?
Yeah.
But he graduated from there. My mom had just graduated from college, and she was visiting a current beau at Cornell University. And my dad was from that area, near Ithaca, New York. He was getting on the train to go enlist in the Navy. She was on the train going home back to Wilkes-Barre.
Really?
And he sat down next to her on the train, really hit it off on that 2.5-hour train ride.
Yeah.
And he said when he got off the train, I think I'd like to marry you someday, but I'm going into the Navy or something like that. And he was pretty
slick guy.
Yeah. He saw what he liked, did something about it. And he came back and married her, and she wanted to stay in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area. So that's where he started his business. And his first job was as a draftsman for an architect in Wilkes-Barre, Lacey Atherton and Davis. And but it was a family-owned firm, and he wasn't family, and he just knew that wasn't going anyplace. Probably
got it.
Didn't really love it, and but he stayed there for I think 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And my mom had several older brothers who were very creative themselves and successful in business. They were making ball bearings for the Army for airplanes and things. One of them had walked into a hardware store locally, and he overheard a government official asking the owner of the store, "Can someone make us these ball bearings?" And he piped up and said, "I can." And that led to a very successful career for them.
Sure.
So
wow,
when they were introduced to my mom, the boyfriend, he was telling them what he liked to do, and what he wanted to do someday was make furniture. And they saw what he had done and really thought it was great. And I think maybe loaned him a couple $1,000s to get started. And
cool. And was he at the time sort of, I think I heard it described as the wood shop in the basement. Was he, starting to experiment a little bit?
I think he was working with what he could get. So
sure.
The house was a house that my grandmother owned, and it was a duplex. So they were on one side, grandma was on the other side. And it's pretty hard to get a saw, a bandsaw, or anything down in the basement of a duplex.
True.
What he could get was a vise.
Okay.
And so the first things that he made were wrought iron, just bending legs and arms and maybe a couple of boards for a back.
Sure.
Post-war, it was very hard to get fabric. So you want black nylon? Do you want white nylon or something in between?
Yeah.
And put those on. So and then be able to get it out of the basement, so.
right. Once you assemble it, it's like I've made this creation, but now you gotta pivot.
He did that for, I think, possibly 2 years, and mostly furnishing his brother-in-law's homes or whatever.
Wow.
And after that, he got even before that, my mom and he they bought a trailer, a small little trailer, and put everything that they had made, and went into Philadelphia, made appointments. My mom was not afraid to call anybody. And so she called Wanamaker's and said, my husband's making furniture. I want to show it to you. And they'd say, okay. Or maybe the buyer didn't know, but his secretary made the appointment because she felt sorry for my mom or something. I really don't know what.
Hey, that's sales.
Right. Their first trip was not that great. They got to Wanamaker's. The buyer would not come down. He said, I don't come down to anyone's truck to look at their furniture. And but my mom called him again. He
and said, that's why they're no longer around, ladies and gentlemen.
And my mom said, well, what do you need if you don't need any furniture? He says, actually, what I'm looking for is someone to make me napkins. My mom said, I can make you napkins. And he said, you can. And so mom and dad went up to his office. She drew out the napkins and he said, all right, I need 400 of those. And how fast can you get them? And so they settled on a deal. Mom and dad celebrated. They went out to dinner and realized that mom had underpriced them and that they actually had lost about $100.
And that's a startup.
That's a startup. Yeah, there you go. But actually it turned into an excellent relationship and
sure,
over the years became really good buyers. And then after that, I think he took a little bit of that money and got a shop that maybe they could put in 2 or 3 bandsaws. And his younger brother, joined him at that point. He had planned on a career in the Air Force, but Dad made him an offer he couldn't refuse, which was, you don't have to serve in the military. So, and Uncle Dick was kind of like the financial side of everything. He was a good math student and everything.
Yeah.
And my father was, the creative side, but they both worked side by side on saws. I don't know how long that didn't last very long. I don't think. That's really where it started.
Yeah. And that helps to hatch, sort of a vision for, the style, I would imagine. And even now, the way that you've described some of the experimentation sort of in a small quarters, right? I could see why you might end up with a sculptural sort of look to it, right? So if you're limited, and I think about creative constraint a lot, does that help you produce something that's better because you were constrained?
I think
if you can only do so much with a 2x4 or a 4x4, right? And you start whittling down on it because you don't have that much space to make some huge cuts, maybe you end up with something that really.
And how do you make shapes out of wood if you don't have a saw?
Right.
So foam was coming into, really just the beginning of foam. No one had thought about sculpturing foam. They were, I don't know what they were doing with it, maybe seat cushions, but they weren't carving it. They weren't cutting it. And he figured out a way after a while to, do that and apply glue to it and then apply frames to it. And so it definitely necessity.
Right.
When you're confined like that, what can I make in this space? What can I make in this kitchen?
What can I bend to get out of this room that I've built this thing in? Yeah. Wow, that's very special. Awesome. And then, it sounded like some of these relationships went well and just he kind of kept continuing to refine and build the company up.
The they really invested a lot of their time in going to furniture shows for manufacturers, which in those days were typically held in armories in different cities, like the Armory in New York or the Armory in Chicago. And they spent a lot of time traveling, and I spent a lot of time traveling with them because they couldn't afford a babysitter or anything. So I flunked first grade too.
Well, it sounds like it was for good reason.
But he made
you were getting all that culture.
Absolutely. Right? And it's where I learned about food too, because they didn't leave me in a hotel room. We would have dinner with the Firestones at Goodyear, and we would have dinner with so-and-so people. And I was always there. And occasionally my mom would say, he doesn't belong at that meeting. I'll take him shopping at Neiman Marcus while Dad's doing this, go to the fashion show. So I was at a lot of fashion shows too.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. But that's, so organically the way that you're telling him, that the story about how this sort of continued to morph, right? You've got, cultural influences, you've got fashion influences, potentially around patterns and or textiles. You've got, different, different business minds coming together and sort of talking about probably manufacturing in many senses post-war. Right. So I could see why, that collective sort of environment helped your father to become really so prolific as he honed in on his style.
And there were a lot of family members that really were integral, maybe not a direct relation. For instance, my uncle's wife's brother was a salesman. He was just a born salesman. Sure. My father was, not a salesman. In fact, if he sees a salesman coming, he runs, kind of like, and so he kind of gave that part of the business to that guy to manage. Right. And his name was Ray Kresge, been Philadelphia native, and he was the guy that got it sold. Sure. And other young men that were just coming back from the military or, that didn't have jobs just kind of flocked, and it grew, but it was a friendly group, and it grew rapidly, almost more at some point too rapidly, which is not a good thing either.
Sure.
Never saw Dad. We were the kids that
when
didn't have
focused.
Dinner with Dad. We were fed at 5. Dad came home at 8. And he was out of the house at 6. But it was all worth it.
Yeah. Well, then, so what kind of pieces at this point in time, sort of in the company's maybe early phase? What sort of pieces were being made? Were those chairs?
Well, the first ones were iron, and then in the initial part of once actually having a factory, it was basically a straight sofa or daybed with some either iron legs or turned walnut legs that he didn't manufacture. He just bought, put them on. Fabric selection became easier.
Right.
But what the look that really took off was a sofa or a love seat with end tables attached. It was a one-piece sofa. And that throughout his career was a signature piece.
The integrated tables were so popular. But here's the thing about, now I follow auctions, I followed them, I'm a collector, and I've followed them for a while. Right. And there's always been somewhat, for the longest time, that Adrian Pearsall pieces, as well made as they were, as good a quality as they were sort of second tier within the auction market. And then Wright in Chicago about 10 years ago brought up, it wasn't just integrated tables, there was also drawers on the tables as well for this particular couch. And it sold way above estimate. Now I share to a fairly large social media network of followers and fans, or whatever you want to call them. They love Pearsall pieces. They are the easy likes winner. People just overwhelmingly like them.
That's great.
One of the people that follow me is a very, very high-end, a European auction house. And I was going through their things they had for sale. And I saw it was a very beautiful, low, sort of slightly, not necessarily L-shaped, but an angled sofa. And I recognized it with the caster seat. It was an Adrian Pearsall piece. And as I was going through their showcase of things they had for sale, they would go out of their way to bring in Adrian Pearsall, particularly the sofas, into a Europe. I won't mention their name, but into a Europe. And an Adrian Pearsall sofa with an integrated table or the back table on the corner, they sell those for in excess of $25,000 US now. It's nothing for them, and they sell. They have buyers. They fly buyers into the US to find as many Adrian Pearsall pieces as possible, and to get them back to Europe, where they'll often refinish the wood or reupholster them, and they look amazing, and they can't keep them in stock. Gondola sofas in particular are hugely popular. Anything with an overly, not necessarily overly, but a very nicely sculpted base or leg always sells out. So yeah, no, if you look at it that way, was it worth the effort? Well, it certainly left an incredible legacy of people that are willing to put out quite a bit for your father's work. And it took a while getting there, but I'm happy to say, and I'm very pleased to say.
Well, we didn't know he was famous, until 15 years ago, really. But we had no distribution in Europe at all. And the chair behind me actually came as a result of a phone call from someone who knew I was doing this authentication online and everything.
Sure.
He said, when I was in the Air Force, I bought this chair. I fell in love with it. He was a pilot, and he, I think, was overseas on 3 different occasions as a post, and everywhere he went, that chair went. So it's been around the world a couple times. And he was nice enough to call me, and he said, I don't know if you would have any interest in this chair. I don't know how much it's worth. And quite frankly, I live in a colonial, it's not like I'm out there collecting. I want it for my kids. Sure. It really doesn't fit in my house. It does now. I think it looks great in the house, but but he was so kind, and he said, how much is it worth? And I said, well, to me, it's really, $500 or $600. Right. And I said, but you'll get a lot more on that if you put it online. He says, no, I really don't want to go to the hassle of it, and I want a Pearsall to have it. So we drove down to Washington, D.C., picked it up that day, barely fit in the car, but we got it in. And
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And that is the original fabric on it. I haven't touched it. Wow. I haven't re-glued it. I haven't done anything to it. The sofas that you were referring to, one of the drawbacks with those was their size. And I imagine getting it to Europe, it's even bigger of a problem. They're like 110 inches long. Yeah. They're large.
And especially that sort of 45 degree or 60 degree
the angle
one.
Ones, yeah. They don't come apart either. I mean,
they're well made.
But we have tons of stories about those. Maurice Valenci in New York would sell them, and he thought he sold them until they tried to deliver them in these apartments to get them into an elevator. They figured out how they could put them on top of an elevator, and go 1 floor below and then pull them out the doors out that. And then they get all the way down to the hallway to realize that they couldn't get into the apartment or whatever. So there were modifications for the New York City and the Chicago crowds, but the original ones didn't go far from home.
Right. That's incredible. And it sounds like, so at what point, you said about 15 years ago, it started to become clear that really, it sounds like there needed to be an authority on, making sure certifying
not even that long ago.
And authenticating.
Well, of course, you know this, but Craft Associates, my father sold in 1970 to the Lane Company.
Sure.
And he was 40 years old when he sold it. And it was kind of shocking because we said, Dad, what are you going to do?
It's like, we know how you are, Dad. You're going to need a project or something.
He said, I've been thinking about that. So we bought they bought a condo in Key Biscayne, a nice big one. And he said, we're all going to move to Florida. I said, all right, that sounds cool. And I think we had been there 3 days, and he got a phone call. It was, I think, on New Year's Eve, actually. Cool. And it was from a gentleman named John Graham, who was my age and was my neighbor growing up. And John was in Texas working for the Peace Corps, and called my father out of, they were just good friends. He was a good person.
Neighbor, knew
and
each
he
other.
said, I think I'd like to get into the furniture business. What do you think about that? Dad said, well, I just retired. And he said, I know.
And, fresh off retirement, a couple days later.
He said, I am under a no-compete clause with the land company for a couple of years, but I can make a trip out to Dallas and we could talk. So they went out and got together and had dinner. And Dad said, look, I can't work for you. I can't do anything with you. But take a look at the back of this napkin, go home and make it. And tell me what you think. And John did that. And Dad said, yeah, you got it. You did it. Now go try to sell it. And so John took it around and he said, all right, my year's up. I'll be there. And they started a company called Comfort Designs.
Wow.
And that was another
cool.
20 or 30 years.
Right. That was after you retire, you gotta find something to do. And
as DC knows, you don't come up with ideas every year. You have your low points, your high points.
Yeah.
And in the furniture business, there are what's called freelance designers, and totally acceptable. I mean, you call it Adrian Pearsall owned the company, but Adrian Pearsall didn't necessarily design everything.
Sure.
And he had a lot of good connections by then, and a very diverse kind of selection, far more than Craft Associates ever had.
Sure.
But Craft Associates
more so, sofas and
I would say almost total
chairs.
house. Dining room, sofas,
cool.
pretty much everything. At Craft, how would I say this? At Craft, we had a really good team of sales reps, excellent sales reps.
Sure.
The best in their industry. And at one point, the largest employer in Pennsylvania. Craft is with 1,700 employees. It was big.
Wow. Yeah.
But one of the very few furniture factories that wasn't in North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia. It wasn't part of the in crowd.
Right.
And
that's again, pretty cliquey.
Very cliquey. And the Lane Company, thinking, we're the biggest, and being in Alta Vista, Virginia, said, we can incorporate this. My dad they didn't have a contemporary division, so they wanted Adrian Pearsall to grow even more.
Right.
My dad started his day on the loading dock and probably designed more in his bedroom at night, than not at his desk. He was more concerned about getting the furniture out in one piece and making sure it was quality. And that didn't really fit in with the Lane hierarchy. The day they bought the company, there was a parking sign that said parking for president, parking for this, parking for that. And my father took them all down. He said, no, that's not who the parking's for. The parking is for our suppliers, our visitors or whatever.
Yeah, customer first. Yeah.
And Dad ate his lunch on the loading dock with the guys every day. It didn't matter. It never changed. That's where he had his lunch. I had to work there. It was my first job. But,
sure.
It wasn't the privileged Jim Pearsall working. I was.
Yeah, you were earning it.
I was
right?
the guy with the glue all over my hands and in my hair. And I was there at 6:30 in the morning, and I didn't get to go home like everyone else did at 3:30 because my dad didn't go home to 7. So I was there.
You had your own headmaster here,
right?
And he worked you. I mean, so you were doing some manufacturing yourself, and then how did your roles progress at Craft?
No, I was a laborer at Craft Associates when I got out of college and opened the restaurants and then ended my restaurant career when we decided we wanted children, and children and a restaurant were not a good mix.
Late hours and
my dad wouldn't give me $1 million to open another restaurant. He said, maybe you should look into maybe representing us. And I said, is there a representing job available there? And he said, no. And he didn't own the sales company. I mean, it was part of the company, but he didn't own it. He didn't direct it. And he said, he said, we're going to have to go through some hoops here. I said, I kind of like, what do you mean, Dad? You own Comfort Design. Why can't I have a salesman? These guys are good. Are you a salesman? I said, yeah, I don't know, but I think I could be.
Yeah.
He said, actually, I've seen you in the restaurant. You're out there on the floor selling this, that, I think you could do it.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy. I had to spend
takes time,
a
repetition.
I had to spend a month with the Texas rep, traveling Texas. I spent a month with the New York City rep, traveling New York.
Wow.
But meeting wonderful people and seeing what a really good salesman was, what a really good salesman did.
Yep.
And they were home less than I was as a restaurant.
If you're good and you're out on the road and you're making those connections, I know the drill.
There's something about, as a kid, I really couldn't relate to my father, but wow, when you know how hard people work to sell his stuff, how hard he works to make it and everything, it was something I was privileged to do.
Yeah.
And I really, cool. I loved that job. Absolutely.
And look, when you're selling, you have an even deeper connection, right? But when you're selling a quality product, I just happen to know, you can really let that passion fly, and that, when that person gets that piece of furniture and it's the right one for them, they're going to love it. I mean, you can go one step further and say, hey, my dad crafted this. It does help just a little bit. It does help, but it's about representing it, to your point. And, the other thing I'll say just about business a little bit too, is that when you really know, in my opinion, all the steps that went into, that craft, maybe being a laborer, you have that empathy for the people who are doing that, and you can represent that outwardly. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
some of those people are still living, or will be in touch with me and say, I remember when you came to work for your dad, you were so nice, or whatever. And when Lane came in, because they were a Southern company, unions sort of tried to infiltrate and everything. And, of all the employees and everything, there were a few that would have preferred to have a union. But basically, they said Adrian Pearsall was always taking care of us, no matter if mom's in the hospital or, he was truly loved. Everyone there, management was truly loved. They were good people.
Sounds like a leader.
If I may, there is a photo of him standing next to a sailboat and the ocean behind him. And he's simply standing there. And we'll say he looks awfully fit.
He was.
But with this really sincere, almost most welcoming expression with a smile on his face. It was just, and when I see that photo, and I think I shared it with you, John, I believe, recently. Yeah. He looks like such a nice guy, not just a creative guy and a hard worker and a dedicated father. He just looks like a really nice, approachable guy. If you saw that guy, he'd be the first person you'd go to ask directions from, because you'd help him. And so that's what I always think when I look at that. Like, we don't know, as collectors, we only know the object. We only know the end result of the effort that went into it and the blood, sweat, and tears. We don't know the individuals behind it. And that's why it's great to talk to you right now, because it's really fleshing out this three-dimensional character. It's really wonderful to put so much behind a face, and not just a face, of course, in himself, but the wonderful designs he had. It's just nice to hear these stories. I'm so happy to hear he was a nice guy.
He didn't have an ego. He had no ego whatsoever. He truly enjoyed everything that he did. He loved working. He loved sailing. His stepmom, his dad had 3 wives. All of them died in childbirth. I mean, all wife, 3 in a row. But he was raised by a British mom, who I think by the time he came around, she was older, but she really encouraged him and sailed with him, although she couldn't swim, and he was a lifeguard in Ithaca. He was a little bit of a risk taker. He drove a little too fast, played a little too hard, maybe, but he was genuinely a nice guy, and he was very competitive.
Sure. Yeah.
Every summer, at one time or another, a supplier or a salesman would show up and spend a couple of nights with us, and his favorite thing to do was beat him in ping pong. And those ping pong battles would go on till 2 a.m. I mean, and my room was above the ping pong table, and I could just hear him going at it constantly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, was that in that house in what is it? Is it 40 Fort, the town?
Yeah, that was one of the. We also had most of the people that came to visit us came during the summer. We had a summer house at Harvey's Lake.
Okay,
and actually, that's another house that he sort of built. He built a fairly traditional on a very narrow piece of shoreline, and added on 4 rooms to the end of the house, all in a row. It kind of looked like a Motel 6.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And but they were all floor to ceiling sliding glass doors of every bedroom. Every bedroom had its own bath. And then a catwalk on the outside of those rooms, which basically overlooked the dock and onto the lake. And this is amazing. My wife and I were riding along about a week ago in the car. We were looking for an Airbnb up in Maine.
Sure.
And one comes up in Harvey's Lake, Pennsylvania, and it's my parents' house. And it is no mention of Adrian Pearsall, no nothing. But they say the coolest Airbnb in Pennsylvania, $800 and some a night. But no mention of Adrian Pearsall or anything. But it is somewhat of an iconic looking place.
I bet. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. Maybe we'll go. Maybe we'll go record a podcast there or something. Have a little soiree
on location. Yeah.
My wife and I had our first date there. I brought her home to meet my parents.
Beautiful.
Hoping to impress her with the house.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
And so that's because of that architecture training, really, that he went through.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's why although he wasn't the lead architect or anything on his house in 44, he hired an engineering firm to build that and everything. But he did do a lot of the drawings, and it was a very, very special house. I don't think we knew it at the time as kids growing up. And I didn't live there very long because that was when I was going to high school.
Yeah.
But this house, it was everything about our passions. One passion in our house was ice cream. We all ate ice cream every night, and we didn't eat just a little. There was no such thing as a little dish of ice cream, even for my grandmother, who was forbidden to eat chocolate, but we supplied her every night with chocolate ice cream anyway. We had a commercial ice cream dispensing that held, I think 6 or 8 of those big containers, that you see at an ice cream store, plus the soda water and all the syrups and toppings and everything. And we had a round fireplace in the family room with beanbag chairs all around it.
So did he basically invent the beanbag chair?
My father was not afraid to copy and or at least improve upon.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty common in the furniture industry. It's kind of like the best compliment you can do. And my father always said, when he was asked why you don't trademark or patent any of these things, he said, it's like women's fashions, Jim's. The dress that they introduced last year, anyone could care less about if it got copied the following year.
Right.
Now, I was always under the impression that it was an Italian collective called Sacco, SACCO, in 1968. I actually know the month, weirdly. It was May 1969, sorry. They introduced apparently the first beanbag chairs, and they're still making them today. So
that's what that's what I had heard, although I heard it was more like a bed than it was a chair. I don't know.
It was very big. Yeah.
He had been to Milan. He had seen this in Milan.
Oh wow.
And
that's where they're based.
but the story goes, so Dad said, well, I'm not sure what they were making him in Milan, but Dad decided to make his out of leather. And he shaped it more like a teardrop or a Hershey kiss. And wasn't sure what to fill it with, and certainly didn't know how bad little styrofoam beans can be when they fall out of things, and didn't put linings in them, and so there were some missteps. But he actually, it was a last minute thought, and as you know, the furniture industry every 6 months puts on a show called High Point, where all the manufacturers show what their new introductions are. And Dad, as a last minute thought, said, I'm going to put this on the plane when we go to High Point. And my uncle was with him, and he's the finance guy. And He said, "Don't embarrass us, Adrian. Don't take that with you." And the guy's taking the luggage out of the car, and Dad handed him some money. He said, "Don't let him see it, but I want this on the airplane." And the guy said, "Yes, sir." And they're on the plane. My uncle's looking out the window, and he sees the guy taking it to the bank. He says, "Adrian, I told you, no, you will embarrass us. That cannot go on the floor." And so they got to High Point, set up the showroom. That night, my father went back to the showroom after the doors had closed and everything, put it out on the floor.
Yes.
Next morning, awesome. They were lining up to make truckload orders of them.
Wow.
So, I never asked him if he, I would never ask him if he copied it, but,
sure.
People would stand outside of his showroom and copy his stuff all day long, So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Jim,
I think of a few who were copying your father for sure.
Right. Relevant topic. Is that why it seems like I went to the website you guys have had up for a bit. Yeah. Is that why you pulled down a number of images? Because you saw people. So
when Dad died, my brother, who, was the youngest of the group and probably had more interaction with my father, and he says, Dad was pretty famous. And I said, really? Kind of like, he said, what? He said, and his partner said to him, you really need to do something to protect your father.
Sure.
Yeah. And I was in the furniture business but there was so much furniture. I mean, what am I have a job to do. I don't have time to catalog all this and everything.
Right.
And this was sort of like I'd had some computer training in college and everything, but I didn't know how to set up a web page or anything like that. And my brother's partner said, look, I'll help you get a website, but you really need to do this. So I thought, okay, great. Let's make a tribute would be to his university. Let those architecture students have a catalog or something. Sure. I didn't have none of us had catalogs. They belonged to the reps. The reps put them in stores. When the stores went out of business, they went in the trash, and maybe a rep kept a copy, but there weren't many copies.
Wow.
And so I had I think it was his purchasing manager had a full catalog. And typically in those days, if something was discontinued, you pulled it out of the catalog and threw it away.
For function, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And never to be seen again. Right. Fortunately for us, this particular person had a full catalog of everything my father, and he put little notes on, didn't fly,
wow.
Didn't do this, and
doesn't fit through doorways in New York City.
And he handed it over to me. And I think what really set this all in motion was we went to file a name of craftassociates.com, and it wasn't available. And we're going, huh? Who would want that name?
Right.
And it turned about to be these people, not quite sure where they were at that time in their lives, in Texas, I think, decided to call them Craft Associates. And, all I can say is that they were very good at duplicating identically some pieces that, really made Dad famous. And we were angry. And, our intention was to share this with, with the university, with students of design, whatever. Right. And I had managed over a couple of months to get everything up online. And all of a sudden I said, wow, this, and then we contacted an attorney and they said, basically, Jim, you need to establish yourself as the authority.
Sure.
Forget about the name. You can call it something else. You can be AdrianPearsall.com. Craft Associates isn't nearly as important as protecting his designs, and you can't do that without being the authority. And I said, well, how do you be an authority? Well, make yourself, like, if someone wants to authenticate it,
right,
you can do it. You have the catalogs to prove that he designed it or manufactured it.
Yep.
And so that's what we did. And it took a long time, and I'm not a graphic designer. I did the best I could. My niece is an architect, and she said she's going to take over the redesign of the website and everything.
Oh, beautiful.
Basically, it started. It was like lunch money, and I didn't want the money. I didn't need the money. I think initially it was $25, and I'll authenticate it, and I'll give you a little story about my dad.
Yeah.
Now it is it's more than lunch money.
Yeah, I bet.
I was surprised when you said $25. I'm going, that's way underpriced for authentication.
Yeah, and it should be.
So I mean, it was hard. Everything that was coming in was different. I had to go through the catalogs and flip all the pages, and then tell them the story about when I thought it was made and everything, and how to take care of the walnut and right. things like that. And then I thought, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And people were, I don't know who they were pretending to be. I thought they would pontificate about how great my father was. Like, yeah, he's good. But he's not what you think he was. He wasn't the master of design. He never thought he was the master of design.
Sure.
And but eventually, it gives us just more strength. The internet, unfortunately, lives forever. There are places where you can, and I'm not going to tell you where they are, or your listeners where they are, but you can find pretty much everything that he did at one place or another.
Sure.
And we've tried.
There is one chair of his, though, that I know for a fact is hugely popular with dealers in Chicago. They're always looking for them, but it is a great looking chair because of the absurdly high back.
Yeah.
The Slim Jim chair.
The Slim Jim.
Great chair. Named after me, by the way.
Is it? Is it? I was going to ask that.
Dad always called it the Slim Jim chair. Yeah. They were actually in our dining room as well.
It's such great looking chair. Little built-in headrest that you can sit on the top of it. And it's just a great chair. But there's a guy in Chicago who claims to have sold the most of them because no matter what the condition they're in, people line up to buy them. It's just, I don't know what they sell for, but it's got to be a few thousand at least just for one in any condition.
They're not a strong chair. The legs on them are long. If someone leans back in them, they'll collapse. But but sort of getting back to the house. Right. Getting back to the house and what I grew up with, we had it was all my father's furniture, of course. I got to design my own bed, which he made for me.
Wow.
Which was a bunk bed, kind of like a gondola, 2 gondolas on a perch.
Wow.
And on an iron base. And
is that still around?
It actually is. My brother has a place in Newport, Rhode Island, and has an Airbnb, and he put it in the Airbnb as one of the rooms.
Wow.
My kids want it. The problem is, it weighs about 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, a bit of a process.
And none of them have a home that they can really put it into.
Sure.
Let alone get it out of where it is.
From a collecting point of view, you can't say there are very many one-off Adrian Pearsall designs.
That's true.
I'm assuming this is a one-off.
It's definitely.
Yeah, I can see a lot of people lining up for that one.
My kids all want it. I said, no, you don't, because you kill yourself getting it, only to find out it won't fit in your house.
Right. Measure well. Measure twice.
But our house, besides the ice cream thing, was a very large kitchen with a center island, a full-length shuffleboard, indoor shuffleboard thing.
Love that.
The width of the house. A library, which was the center of the living quarters, with a huge, not a sun, whatever you call them, skylight over it. But it wasn't a skylight that you would see today. This skylight was about 30 by 20. It was huge.
Love it. I mean, just that integration with nature, just like the lake house. I mean, was so classic to the modernist type.
But they couldn't get a crane back to the house to put that skylight in, so they used helicopters.
It's always a solution. That's amazing.
So
it's design without limitation.
Right. We had a huge library table that was made out of walnut in the middle, with big comfortable chairs. So in all the rooms, there were 5 bedrooms that came off of that, and like in a circle around the library.
Yeah. And
at the one end of the library and going into the dining room was a fountain. And Dad made a metal sculpture that would spin around in this fountain as the water hit it. It was very abstract looking. And then the water would run under the marble floors into the dining room. So you had to get on stepping stones to get into the dining room. There was no way to walk into the dining room unless you were coming from the kitchen. And
that's a fairy tale. I mean,
so
it's incredible.
It really is.
I mean, it was the scene of a lot of accidents, but
yeah, going in and out of the dining room,
intentional,
right?
some not. You know, like when you had friends over and you wanted to really get them going, you could say, chase me, and then they'd go flying into the pond, which because there was a collection pond between the fountain, and there were fish in the pond, and then you stepped into the dining room.
Wow.
And after about a year of living with this sculpture that spun, and Dad say, everyone's getting up to go to the bathroom all the time. Well, it turns out, fountains make you want to pee.
Yeah, they sure do.
Which is why they use them at sporting events in the Olympics. That's why they have water running constantly to get the samples.
So you drink more beer.
So we turned the fountain off. We kept the sculpture. We turned the fountain off. And the fish swam everly.
Did that connect also into the pool, or was that totally
no?
separate?
That was the second half of the house, and I wasn't living there when they did that. But he built. They really enjoyed just a pool, so he built an indoor pool, which had a photography studio for my mother, another 2-car garage, and two changing rooms and 2 bedrooms.
Wow! And
that skylight. I don't know how big that was, but that took 2 helicopters to lift into place.
Well, I guess once you figured out how to place the first one, right? You might as well.
But they liked warm water, so they kept the pool at 90 degrees.
Ooh, bathy.
And that, as nice as it is very destructive to a house. Back in the days, they didn't make these air handling systems that took all that moisture out of you. And he had, I think it was redwood. Probably, I'm not sure, but that was the basis of the interior. And when I went to sell that house after they passed away, that was all rotted, and water was just like oozing out of it. Right. Yeah, some things you do well, some things not quite so well.
Hey, look, no, it sounds like so much decision making and fun.
Absolutely fun. We had a lot of fun. Always, our Christmas parties were, they liked to entertain, and Christmas was a special good time. And typically 200 to 300 people would come through the house at Christmas. And Dad liked to bake cookies, so he would roll out all the dough and then have them cut out and on baking sheets, and then people would come through and decorate them, and then they'd go on to the ice cream bar, have an ice cream, and eventually get through the house. And that's sort of when I took up with the cooking and entertaining.
Yeah.
And,
you had those built-in private parties. That's amazing. One thing I am curious about is licensing. I feel like I continue to learn a little bit more, and I feel like all different families approach it in sort of a different way, right? It sounds like some of his designs might be available through restoration hardware.
That's correct.
Is that right?
And this was all new to us. I mean,
Just curious
our
how
attorneys
it works.
said, establish yourself as the authority, and you're dealing with all these daily letters and everything. And one day I get this letter from a very nice woman at Restoration Hardware, and she said, their owner, I've forgotten his name at this point, but said, is infatuated with your father. What are the possibilities of licensing this?
Wow. You asking me? Am I the guy?
I talked to my brother and my sister. I said, do you have any interest in this? And they said, yeah, it might be my lunch money. And the hardest part was actually finding a piece that they thought that they could sell, to fit into their sort of thing. Yeah. And then actually getting an original of the one they liked, which was harder than we thought. And so we spent about a year. They actually paid for several pieces that were sent to them, saying from their current owners, "Oh, this is an original Adrian Pearsall piece," without asking me, or I may not have known, but anything. And they go to the trouble of sending it to their people to make and
Yeah.
redo and everything. And that's not Adrian Pearsall. He didn't design that piece, and but we eventually landed on 4 pieces that were all original. They're you can't ask for a better relationship. We don't talk to them.
It's great to hear.
We thought we kind of run our course with them,
Yeah.
with the 4 pieces that he did. They did phenomenally well. And then buyers come and go, people come and go. And my brother was the contact with them. And I said to him, do you think they're ever going to do anything else with this? He said, I don't know. Like 3 days later, a letter comes, we'd like to do some chairs. We'd like, we're investigating this. So it is an ongoing relationship.
That's great.
And naturally, we wanted to make it exclusive with them.
Yeah.
We trusted them and really not interested in licensing it to anyone else at this point. I don't know what would happen, my children, other or whatever might want to do. But right now, it's a very, very excellent relationship.
That's great to hear. And it's great to hear, that it sounds like it came from a place of true interest, not necessarily just
not
commercial
sales.
interest.
Not just, exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome. And it's, I'm glad to hear that you were able to, for the most part, outside of, some of the brand names potentially, but you're able to navigate that successfully, because it's, if you've never done it before, right? And you don't have the right team potentially, or the right lawyer who understands the nuances of how some of this stuff works, it's easy to make mistakes.
It was so typical of the way my father worked and what we did. I remember after they've been making it for maybe a year and a half, and I said to my brother, what is our commission on this? Are we getting it? He said, I don't know. We couldn't find the contract.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's just like you said a little bit. You sort of realized the house was special, but it was sort of what you knew, right? That was the same thing with your father, I'm sure. Right. This is what we knew. We knew these designs; they were familiar, and so I'm sure it's hard to have that, sort of collector or outside perspective that is so interested in collecting this stuff sometimes. So you don't realize it might be valuable, and then maybe one day comes and says, "Hey, where's that lunch money?
Or I wish I had
I need some ice cream."
Right.
But no, that's so special. No, I think we've covered a lot, and I really appreciate it.
One of your questions that I love, and it's very specific to furniture, is about fabrics.
Oh yeah. I would love to. And you mentioned that earlier, which is great. How sort of there was more choices over time. Was that a specific interest of your father's?
I think, when I kind of came into the salesman part of it, my dad would complain about salesmen all the time, because he'd say, "Oh, they want it 6 inches shorter," or New York needs silks and Miami needs this, and Chicago says, "Oh, we're more traditional out here," And he says, "I want to make it the way I think it should be, and I don't need 150 fabrics." And his sales force, I have to give all the credit to his sales force. They kept it up, and they said, "Look, you might be able to sell that in Chicago, but not in New York. I need New York fabrics." And when I was in Florida, when I was selling it, I was seeing a lot of silks and some other flashy fabrics that maybe he wouldn't have used or something like that. Right. And he got tired of hearing it. He said, "Why don't you come to Dallas with me when we meet with all of our fabric suppliers?
Sure.
And see how hard this is." And he was going to show me that, I didn't know what I was doing, basically, in a nice way. You come and pick out these fabrics and tell me what to do.
Right.
So I said, "Dad, I only represent
a lesson
Florida.
here, huh?
I don't know what they need in New York, but I will tell you what we need in Florida."
Yeah.
And it's a process that I was not accustomed to, but you're in your showroom, and you're in the furniture showroom, and appointments are made months in advance. And these poor guys come in with carts and carts and carts of fabrics, the pattern, and then all the colors of the pattern.
Right.
and you can't possibly buy all of them, and do them. And at the end of the day, I would have such a headache because there's a lot of good fabrics out there, and there were companies that I'm not even sure are around anymore, like David and Dash and some others, and then the old standbys, and then plus we also did customers' own materials.
Sure. Right. Which is a little bit more, I'm sure. If it sounds like from your dad's perspective, he wanted to help make the decisions, which I agree. I think there's too much choice in this world sometimes, right? And so
that was definitely his opinion.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, don't buy it.
Right. Totally. But when there can be a collaboration with a potential owner, and maybe they, are able to have a conversation about it or something, that becomes more of a process of making something better than just, unnecessarily having 20 fabrics to choose from. Yeah.
Right. And again, as much as he really disliked working with buyers, from Bloomingdale's or wherever, he understood that they had a market that they wanted to sell his furniture, and they knew better than he did what people in Washington buy or in Seattle buy or whatever. And it was a good lesson. And, so that was that.
Yeah. And I think, in the long term, and maybe DC, if you have a collector's perspective here, in the long term, I would imagine that being prescriptive about that in the moment made things more and more timeless, probably more and more recognizable.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly, like this chair behind me, that's the original fabric, a little faded, but I would not change it. It's just, I think it's more valuable that way.
Right.
It's rare for a lot of fabrics. The boucles, the wools and whatnot tend to be fairly durable. There's certainly nylon versions of those will last forever. But the one thing about having a limited range of fabrics, of course, is that it automatically dispenses with the trend of the time. You're not going to go with whatever was hot and trendy. It's not going to be a lime green or, fluorescent orange fabric because that's hot right now.
Right.
And that's not going to stand the test of time. When you do have the classic fabrics, and if they do hold up, that's always a premium to a collector, for sure. Yeah. And actually, it's fun to see a chair done in a very 60s fabric that would have only existed in that time.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a chair you would put in your home to fit with what you have. But as an academic piece, they're interesting. But, you need the classics, and you stick with the limited palette that is the classics. It's not limited. I shouldn't say limited.
No, it's not.
The versatile palette that is the classics.
Yeah. So Jim, just to wrap it up here, I was curious if you had potentially a top 2 or 3 of your father's designs that you might have liked the best, maybe outside of the Slim Jim, because it was your namesake, right?
Oh gosh, I like his really early, his very first pieces, the iron pieces.
Okay,
they're
cool.
They're incredibly simple, and the classic gondola sofa I like. There's a couple of chairs that he did much towards the end that were he hated an uncomfortable piece of furniture. He said, if you can't sit in it, if you don't enjoy being in it, what's it about? I mean, he wasn't making museum pieces.
Yeah.
And
they all look comfortable.
They are. Although
that's for sure.
They're kind of small by today's standards, I would say. They're not a big overstuffed chair or anything. Sure. And they were low. And I'm almost 70 now, and I find my back creaking trying to get into that chair a little bit. But
gotta go slow.
Yeah, got it.
I did that with my Eames chair too. Ease into it.
Creaks getting out of bed. I
mean, the armless sofas with the end tables. You can pretty much only face one direction or lie down on it.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
So, but I love those pieces. Every time I see it, I know immediately, if it's his or someone else's.
Yeah, you've got the eye. You are the source.
and I like the wood. I don't. Yeah. I think one of your questions was, did he handcraft this? Did he, sand it and everything? Dad was really about making furniture affordable for the masses. That's how you make money, right?
Yeah.
And you don't make money.
That balance of quality and scale, I think.
Right.
Yep.
And he wanted to get as many of those out in a day as he could, and on the railroad cars leaving the factory. And he spent more time packing railroad cars than he did designing furniture. And he wanted to make sure every last piece got on there.
Right. No, that's the business, right? And I think that's probably what. It was interesting. We had a conversation with an expert in Paul McCobb's designs, which are, I would say, probably sounds similar to your dad's earlier stuff, with some of the iron sort of simplified designs. But we learned there that Paul McCobb really didn't have or own a manufacturing company, but he really just sort of licensed his designs or worked with partners to get these made. And it's so interesting to hear that was really the opposite with your father, and he really came to spend a lot of time on that to ensure probably Q&A or quality assurance, right? And the ability to get these things out once they were fully baked, which is
occasionally
I'm
online and looking at all these critiques of different designers and everything, and sometimes I'll read reviews of like Adrian Pearsall. He was a copy artist. He was made cheap furniture, and I'm going, well, yeah, I mean, that's how he got wealthy.
Right. There is a reality. Sure.
It was made well, but it was made for the masses. I mean,
right.
It wasn't sold at Sears, but it was sold at,
tier 2,
else, pretty much.
Right.
And, I think,
and honestly, I don't think I realized, the scale to the point where they could have been one of the largest largest employer in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That is, to me, I still, and I'm sort of still early in my love and collection. But his designs, in my opinion, are a bit more boutique, but the fact that they were made for that mass market and were accessible in that way, to me is great to hear, right? You got more in different hands and people were able to experience it.
It was interesting. Today I was doing an open house and this family came in, and I think their son was about 14 years old, and he saw a lantern that was sort of mid-century in the house. And he said, "Oh, I love that light." And I said, "Oh, you're a mid-century fan?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "You might know this name, but would you know Adrian Pearsall?" And he says, "Oh," and he's flipping out.
No way.
Yeah.
14?
14.
That's incredible. That's great to hear. I mean, that's how I, I think we kind of found the motivation to do this and talk about it, right? In order to drive more education about this. And I really, and I think DC and Greg feel the same way. I think it's kind of just beginning. And I think that we need to do a good job of packaging some of this up. And so people recognize certain designs as, mid-century or mid-century modern, and it is celebrated, right, in a big way. I mean, I've had some conversations recently about sort of the perceptions of America, maybe from an outer viewpoint or different countries. And it's like, I'd like the perception to be modernist architecture. And because that was really novel, right, during that post-war period, and helped to define what America was at that time.
I mean, America led the way in post-war architecture.
Right.
It was the thing that most people, for at least 15, 20 years, I mean, you look to America for the inspiration. Certainly in Europe, they were rebuilding after the war. So something about a fine design was less important than just getting stuff built.
Right.
But after that, it was, people were importing into the Riviera, California mid-century modern, essentially because of the similar climates.
Yeah.
But quickly into that, there became that rarefied notion that design was fine. So therefore, it was going to be into the upper echelons of society where they'd have superstar architects for, architecture and design. But you do have developers like Joseph Eichler, Adrian Pearsall, Paul McCobb, who are saying, no, good design is a good solution.
Right.
Everybody deserves a good solution. You need a comfortable chair. Here's a great piece of design. It's the solution to your problem of needing a good chair. Same for architecture. And you need more of that, and you certainly need more of that now. We don't need more imports of cheaply made or copied furniture from some other place. It should be something that you can take pride in, that this is locally designed, this is locally made, or at least nationally designed and nationally made. It's woefully missing right now. And I often think sometimes there's two schools of mid-century modern as far as collectors and fans go. Those who simply love the aesthetic, that's great. But those who are on the other side, those who are nostalgic for that time period where there was choice, even at the middle consumer level. And we're, again, woefully missing that. We're woefully missing another Adrian Pearsall. Just my personal point of view. Most people may not care, but I am not one of those people.
It's astounding to me how much furniture costs these days. So much of it is overseas, and which is why I eventually got out of the industry. I just, I couldn't compete with, I was selling to department stores, but I was like, it just wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed probably the last 20, 30 years, the furniture industry having to, whether it's dealing with copycats or just the type of manufacturing, right? The anti-benchmade, where there's just lines and lines of furniture that are, individual pieces are being made instead of one artisan coming together, making decisions about what's best for the piece and then assembling that piece sort of all at once. I think that's really important. There's pockets of people doing it well in the US and I'd say, North America. But we need more. And I think, we've aligned on that a number of times. We want to see more Adrian Pearsall's, right? Making purposeful decisions about, what this piece should look like, what this piece should be, actually good question. Were any of the woods or the lumbers, were those like local relationships in Pennsylvania or, West Virginia?
My father's, knowledge of wood came from his father, who owned a lumber yard after he got out of being a school teacher.
Cool.
I don't know how much he knew about that. Or I think walnut was one of those things that was available. And fairly easy to shape, I guess. I don't know.
It's funny what you learn.
He ever worked in any other wood. He worked, at Comfort Designs. We did a lot of iron. And which was very popular, iron beds and things like that, castings.
It's funny what you learn. There's so many, I'm sure in real estate as well, the amount of extensions and bits of knowledge that you learn, right, as a result of, going through, and whether it's preparing for, a conversation or a showing, right? But you got to know that in this house in the 50s, this material was used and it's going to last or it's not going to last.
And it's immediately recognizable. And as you know, in mid-century modern, I mean, some of the houses were built are falling apart today because they weren't particularly well built, or windows leaked or skylights leaked, or, it's endemic in mid-century.
Yeah. And that's why you need those, passionate, this is probably next generation of passionate owners and caretakers of some of this stuff, which I'm trying to be one myself at some point, certainly. And, and just recommend that people really start paying attention. The last thing here I've been trying to ask more consistently, is there anybody you would nominate for us to have on the show that you might be able to either put us in touch with or you might have a relationship with?
I'm afraid most of the ones that I know are gone. I was just asking John Graham, the guy that owned Comfort Designs.
Yeah.
He's still making furniture. And he could tell you stories about my father that I'm not privy to.
And probably the furniture industry at certain points. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't even thought of him until just as I said that. I said he would be great because he could tell you stories that, I just don't know all the stories.
Sure. I always like talking to another sales guy.
Yeah.
As you can tell.
But John was, the business that really got Comfort Designs going. He had the interest or the foresight to bring my father into it, and it was they had a great relationship, and it was good.
Now I bet if he found that napkin and framed it, now that'd be a collector's item, right?
I think the one thing I want to say about my dad is he did not have an ego, but I don't think most of the designers in this business do. The ones that I've met, I mean, George Nakashima, every market in High Point, Dad would take me with him and kind of like lead me to the Nakashima. I didn't know who he was, but he was as nice as he could be to me. Yeah. And there are probably others I don't even remember their names. It could have been Paul Evans, and I didn't know it,
right. But which is so cool. I mean,
and they would just roam the halls in High Point. It's basically showroom after showroom. Some had glass windows, some you had to get into, and go in and shake hands twice a year, say hi, how you doing? There were people that worked for my dad, left my father, and went and started their own businesses. Salesmen that all good people, all successful people, but all had a common denominator of, I'm going to work hard and see if this, like, throw it up against the wall and see if it sells. And I feel very lucky to have met so many modest people who have furnished America.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. That's beautiful. And I feel like I could probably see, your dad not wanting to hang out with the business people and maybe going to hang with Paul or George and compare notes.
He had a chair that was behind a screen in our showroom, and he'd fall asleep for most of the day. And he said, don't come get me. Just don't come. That buyer from Wanamaker, he'll want to have dinner with me tonight, and I don't want to have dinner.
Right. Not unless you're cooking, Jim, right? And I bet it was a comfy chair. All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much. We really appreciate the time. Such wonderful. Great stories here. And, I can't thank you enough.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
What beautiful stories Jim told about their family, incredible homes Adrian helped design, and how their businesses evolved and grew so organically. Adrian seemed to always design with purpose, quality, and accessibility in mind. And that's why we're able to enjoy so many of his designs today. And if you have one, go get it authenticated by Jim.